My pregnant sister publicly accused me of seducing her husband, but he revealed the baby wasn't his, and everything exploded at my graduation party. I graduated from nursing school last Saturday, and to celebrate, my parents threw a big party at their house. They invited extended family, college friends, neighbors, pretty much everyone who'd supported me through the years. This was a major milestone for our family, especially because I'm the first one to ever earn a degree, so they wanted to do it right. My sister Emily, who's 24 and 8 months pregnant, showed up with her husband Dennis. They've been married for 3 years. I honestly thought the event would go smoothly. Emily had acted genuinely happy when I told her about the party and even offered to help Mom set up the decorations. But the thing about Emily is, she always needs to be the main character, no matter the setting. She's the type who announced her engagement during our cousin's wedding reception, broke news of her pregnancy at our grandma's 80th birthday, and constantly posts overly dramatic stuff online just to fish for sympathy and attention. Still, the party itself was going great. People were congratulating me on finishing school, asking about my future plans, sharing stories about their own careers. We were all enjoying Dad's homemade barbecue. He'd been up since early morning cooking, and the fancy cake Mom picked up from that bakery downtown. I was standing near the back patio chatting with a few college friends when I noticed Emily getting up from the main table. She had this determined look on her face, the kind I'd seen before, usually when she was about to start something. She walked straight toward me and stopped right in front of us. Then, pointing her finger directly at me, she raised her voice and accused me loud enough for the entire backyard to hear of flirting with Dennis all night and trying to seduce him while she was vulnerable and pregnant. The whole place fell dead silent. People literally froze mid-sentence. Emily kept going, yelling that I was a terrible sister, that I couldn't stand to see her happy, and that I was bitter, jealous, and hell-bent on ruining her family just because I was single. I tried to tell her she was being absurd. I'd barely spoken to Dennis outside of saying hello when they arrived. But she cut me off repeatedly, shouting louder, insisting she saw me touching his arm and laughing at his jokes in some inappropriate way. Dennis just stood there looking stunned and awkward, not saying a word while everyone else watched this train wreck unfold. From across the yard, I saw my parents hurrying over, their faces full of concern as Emily's voice rang over everything. I told her she was creating drama out of nothing and that she needed to sit down before she embarrassed herself any more than she already had. But she didn't stop. Instead, she started crying, saying she felt betrayed and couldn't trust anyone, even her own family. Then, out of nowhere, Dennis, who'd been quiet through the whole meltdown, lifted his head and said something that flipped the entire situation upside down. He told everyone that Emily had been cheating on him, and that the baby might not even be his. Everyone gasped. Emily went pale as Dennis kept talking. He said he'd found text messages on her phone 3 weeks ago from some guy named Randall. According to Dennis, Emily had been sneaking around behind his back for months, and the timing of the pregnancy matched the affair. Emily started screaming that Dennis was lying, that he was just trying to flip the script and distract everyone from his own behavior. But Dennis took out his phone and began reading the messages out loud. Emily lunged to grab it from him, but he kept going. The texts weren't just friendly, they were clearly romantic and sexual. They mentioned hotel meetups when Dennis was working late, and one even had Emily worrying about whether to come clean to Dennis about the baby's real father. She was sobbing and screaming now, claiming the messages were out of context and that Dennis was just humiliating her. But Dennis read more and more, exposing how she'd been lying for months about where she was going and who she was with. At that point, all the resentment I'd been keeping inside about Emily's constant need for attention just exploded. She had taken what should have been my proudest day and made it all about herself, throwing wild accusations just to cause a scene. I snapped. I stepped toward her and shoved her hard enough that she stumbled backward. When she tried to catch herself against a table, I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, yelling that she was a selfish liar who couldn't handle anyone else having a good moment. She started hitting me back, and we ended up in a full-on fight in front of everyone. She was pulling my hair, I slapped her, and the entire party was just frozen in disbelief. My dad and a couple of uncles had to physically pull us apart. My mom was crying, asking what had gotten into us, while Emily clutched her pregnant belly and screamed that I was trying to hurt her baby. I wasn't, I never touched her stomach. I was just furious and tried to avoid it entirely. Meanwhile, Dennis just stood there and watched the chaos unfold. He didn't step in or say a word during the fight. Once my dad got me away from Emily, Dennis spoke up again. He said he was done, he was leaving and Emily could figure out her own ride home. Then he walked right out of the yard. Emily broke down even more, crying and begging him not to go. And then she turned to our parents, demanding that they choose either they were with her or with me. At that point, the whole vibe of the party crashed. Nobody knew what to say or where to look. Within half an hour, most of the guests made awkward excuses and quietly left. My parents were heartbroken. What was supposed to be a joyful celebration had turned into a total disaster. They spent the rest of the evening trying to make sense of what just happened and why it escalated so fast between me and Emily. Emily called one of her friends to come pick her up since Dennis had taken the car when he left. While she waited, she kept crying and insisting that everyone had turned on her and that I'd always been jealous of her perfect life. I stayed behind and helped my parents clean up the decorations and leftover food. It was supposed to be a night we'd all remember for the right reasons. Looking back, I still don't know if I overreacted. I just snapped. Edit: a lot of people are asking how things got so bad so quickly, so I'll try to explain more about my relationship with Emily and the history of her attention-seeking behavior that built up to what happened at my graduation party. To be honest, she and I have never really been that close. Emily has always needed to be the center of attention, it's just how she is, and that personality trait has caused issues at nearly every family event I can remember. When we were kids, she'd fake being sick on my birthday so mom and dad would focus on her instead of celebrating with me. Or, if I brought friends over, she'd start crying and claiming kids at school were bullying her, just to redirect the attention back to herself and away from my relationships. As we got older, Emily's ways of grabbing attention got more calculated and manipulative. She figured out how to stir up drama during other people's big moments, so the spotlight would always swing back to her. For example, at our cousin Megan's wedding reception, she stood up during the speeches, flashed her engagement ring, and announced that Dennis had just proposed to her that morning. It completely stole the show and turned Megan's day into an awkward mess, leaving tension in the family for months. Then last year, when our grandmother turned 80 and the whole family gathered at a nice restaurant to celebrate, Emily waited until everyone had their meals and was settled in. Then she clinked her glass and told the table she was pregnant. From that point on, the dinner wasn't about Grandma's milestone anymore, it became all about Emily's pregnancy symptoms, her due date, and her baby plans. Dennis, for the record, has always been a quiet, laid-back guy. He works as a mechanic, avoids confrontation, and usually stays far away from family drama. That's why it was such a shock when he finally spoke up at my graduation party and told everyone what was really going on with Emily. What made me so furious about Emily's false accusations that day wasn't just that she lied, it was that she hijacked a once-in-a-lifetime moment I'd worked my butt off to reach. Nursing school wasn't easy. It was brutal, honestly. I had to juggle classes with a part-time job, live at home to avoid paying rent, and push through doubts that started way back in high school, or I never thought I'd even make it in college. But I pushed through. I chose nursing because I wanted a stable career where I could help people and support myself. When I finally graduated and passed my licensing exam, I felt like I'd proved to myself and to others that I was capable of more than anyone expected. It meant everything to me. My parents were over the moon about it too. No one in our family had ever graduated college before, so they wanted to celebrate in a big way and thank all the people who helped me get there. They spent weeks organizing the party. They poured their hearts into planning every detail. And Emily knew how much it meant, not just to me, but to mom and dad too. She also knew there was absolutely no truth to the stuff she said about me and Dennis. I was busy talking with my old college friends and reconnecting with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Her accusations came from nowhere, and they weren't just cruel, they were calculated. Update 1. Yesterday, I had a long talk with my parents about everything that happened, about Emily's behavior at my graduation party and the years of attention-seeking episodes that built up to it. I told them, honestly, that they played a role in how things escalated. For years, they pressured me to pretend everything was fine instead of facing Emily's behavior head-on. They've always had this mindset that family issues should stay private and that we should keep up appearances, no matter what was going on behind closed doors. So, every time Emily crossed a line or did something hurtful, they'd just tell me to let it go, that keeping the peace was more important than speaking up. When Emily hijacked Megan's wedding reception with her engagement announcement, I was upset, but my parents told me I was being petty. They said I should be happy for my sister and stop fixating on the timing. Their attitude was that Megan wouldn't even remember it years from now, and I was just stirring up unnecessary drama by mentioning it. Then, after Emily stole the spotlight at Grandma's 80th birthday dinner with her pregnancy announcement, I tried again to explain to my parents that this kind of behavior was a pattern and that it was hurting people. But they brushed me off and said Emily was just excited about her life and wanted to share her good news with everyone. They made it seem like I was the jealous one, being too harsh and not supportive enough of my sister. I told them yesterday that by always brushing off her behavior and prioritizing some illusion of family unity, they'd basically been enabling her. Emily had learned that she could do whatever she wanted as long as she wrapped it in emotional language or framed it as sharing joy. And their refusal to hold her accountable gave her the confidence to pull something as extreme as accusing me of hitting on her husband on my graduation day. At first, my dad tried to defend their choices. He said they always treated both of us fairly and that they couldn't control what their adult daughters did. But I told him that treating us equally isn't the same as ignoring problems. Setting boundaries is part of parenting too, and they failed to do that. I reminded them that what Emily did wasn't just a personal attack on me, it embarrassed our entire family. Our friends, neighbors, and relatives came to celebrate something I'd worked so hard for, and instead, they witnessed a massive scene involving infidelity, a paternity scandal, and a full-on fight between sisters. Some of those people might never want to attend a family event with us again. That kind of damage doesn't just disappear. My mom started crying. She said she had no idea how deeply Emily's behavior had hurt me over the years. She genuinely believed I was just being competitive with my sister and never realized how much pain was beneath the surface. She admitted that they'd been too focused on avoiding conflict and didn't think about how that avoidance was letting things spiral out of control. I told them I appreciated the apology, but words weren't enough anymore. I needed to see real change. And that meant I wouldn't be going to any more family events if Emily was there, not unless she stood up and apologized publicly to everyone she lied to and humiliated me in front of. After everything that went down at my graduation party, my dad asked me what exactly I meant by a public apology. I told him it wasn't complicated. Emily needed to contact everyone who was at the party, admit that what she said about me was completely false, take ownership for causing a scene at what was supposed to be a celebration, and apologize for making people feel so uncomfortable with her personal drama. They took some time, close to an hour, talking it over privately while I waited out in the living room. When they came back, they looked serious. They told me they'd made a decision. Emily was going to be banned from any future family gatherings until she made that public apology. They planned to call her that night and lay it all out. They also said they'd reach out to some of our relatives and close family friends who were at the party to explain that they didn't support Emily's behavior and that they were taking steps to address it. My mom even said she wanted to personally apologize to a few of my college friends who were there. She felt awful that their first real impression of our family was complete chaos. She asked me if I could give her their contact info so she could send them a message letting them know that Emily's meltdown wasn't a reflection of who we are as a family. Later that evening, while I was at work, they called Emily. According to my mom, it didn't go well, no surprise there. As soon as they brought up the party, Emily broke down crying and accused them of abandoning her during one of the hardest times in her life. She said she was 8 months pregnant, her marriage was falling apart, and instead of supporting her, we were all ganging up on her. She claimed Dennis had been distant and cold for weeks leading up to the party, and that she honestly believed I was flirting with him that night. She said her accusations weren't meant to be hurtful, that she'd just been overwhelmed by stress, hormones, and anxiety over her relationship. And according to her, Dennis was the one who crossed a line by bringing up personal stuff in front of everyone. My parents listened but didn't back down. They told her they understood she was going through a tough time, but what she did, publicly accusing me of something so serious, wasn't acceptable. Emotional stress didn't excuse slandering someone at a family celebration. They made it clear, until she took responsibility and apologized, the family ban would stay in place. They encouraged her to reflect on what happened and to start thinking about how to repair the damage she caused. Emily hung up before the conversation was even over. She hasn't answered any calls or texts from them since. Honestly, that's typical Emily. When she doesn't get the reaction she wants, she shuts down and vanishes until the narrative can be spun her way. Update 2, a few days later. Turns out Dennis wasn't bluffing when he said he wanted a paternity test. He asked Emily to take a non-invasive prenatal DNA test, and the results came in yesterday. The baby isn't his. This morning, Emily called my parents in tears. She said Dennis had kicked her out of the house and told her he was filing for divorce. He said he couldn't live with someone who had lied to him for months and didn't want to raise a child that wasn't his. Apparently, Dennis had been emotionally checked out ever since the party. He'd been sleeping in their guest room, barely speaking to her while they waited for the results. When the test came back, confirming the truth, he told her he felt betrayed, manipulated, and completely done with the relationship. Emily's now 38 weeks pregnant, she could go into labor any day, and she has nowhere to go. She doesn't have enough savings to get a place on her own, and most of her friends have distanced themselves since the affair and all the drama became public knowledge. So she called our parents again, crying and begging to move back in, just temporarily, until she figures out what to do after the baby is born. My parents didn't know what to do. They had just told her she wasn't welcome at family events unless she apologized, but now she was pregnant, about to give birth, and facing homelessness. They asked me how I'd feel if they let her stay with them again, and whether I thought it would hurt my relationship with them or make me stop visiting. I told them the truth. I still hadn't forgiven Emily for what she did to me, but I didn't want the baby to suffer for her mistakes. I said they should let her stay for now so she had somewhere safe to deliver and recover. I told them I was angry with Emily, not with her child, and I could separate those two things. At the same time, I made it very clear, this wasn't a free pass. Emily still owed that apology, and I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay just because she was back in the house. I also warned them if she started using her pregnancy or living situation as a way to manipulate them or dodge accountability, then I'd change my stance. They agreed. They called her back and said she could move back into her old bedroom, but only until 6 weeks after the baby was born. That would give her enough time to recover from childbirth and start figuring out her next steps. They made sure she understood this was temporary and didn't mean they were excusing what she'd done. Emily moved back in yesterday. She only brought a few suitcases and some essentials. Dennis apparently gave her almost no time to pack before asking her to leave. My mom said Emily's been crying non-stop since she got there. She keeps saying her life is falling apart and that the people she loves the most have abandoned her when she needed them most. As for Dennis, he told her he'll continue covering her prenatal medical bills, but that's about the extent of his involvement now. Emotionally, he's already moved on. Since they were still legally married at the time, Dennis agreed to cover the cost of Emily's delivery. But he made it crystal clear, once the baby was born, he wouldn't be offering any financial support. He wasn't the father, and he didn't intend to take on that role. He also told Emily she had 2 weeks to collect the rest of her belongings from the house before he changed the locks and officially filed for divorce. Emily has been trying to reach out to Randall, the guy mentioned in those text messages Dennis read aloud at the party, but according to my mom, he's been ignoring all her calls and texts ever since he found out about the pregnancy. Emily told my parents that Randall is married with 2 kids and made it clear from the start that he wasn't leaving his wife or taking any responsibility for whatever came out of their affair. Having Emily back in the house has been overwhelming for my parents. She needs constant emotional support. Between the divorce, the upcoming birth, and the reality of becoming a single mom, she's leaning on them for everything. My mom told me that Emily's been monopolizing their time, crying nearly every day, and asking them to make decisions for her about things like hiring a lawyer, choosing a pediatrician, and applying for government assistance. I've kept my distance from their house since Emily moved back in. I'm not ready to be around her, and I don't want to add more pressure to my parents while they're already dealing with a full plate. I still call my mom every few days to check in, offer support, and send her info about programs that might help Emily transition into independent living after the baby comes. Final update, 1 year later. It's been a full year since that graduation party blew everything apart, my relationship with Emily, her marriage, her reputation, and I thought I'd share where things stand now that the dust has finally settled. Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Grace, just 3 weeks after she moved back in with our parents. Despite everything leading up to it, the delivery went smoothly. Dennis showed up at the hospital when she went into labor, not out of obligation to Emily, but because they were still married and he didn't want her to be alone. But he made it clear that was the extent of his involvement. He wasn't going to be a father to Grace. The divorce was finalized about 8 months ago. It dragged out for a while due to splitting up assets and sorting through spousal support. Dennis got to keep the house, while Emily walked away with a small settlement, which she used to pay her legal fees and start a college fund for Grace. To his credit, Dennis didn't make things messier than they had to be, even though, honestly, he had every right to. Emily never followed through with the public apology my parents required. Because of that, she's still excluded from family gatherings. Instead of finding her own place, she stayed in our parents' house, basically becoming a permanent resident. She works part-time at a retail job, but hasn't managed to achieve any real independence. Eventually, my parents filed for legal custody of Grace. It became obvious Emily was struggling with depression and wasn't equipped to handle a newborn on her own. Since then, they've stepped in as Grace's primary caregivers. Randall, the biological father, still refuses to acknowledge paternity or offer any help. Emily's been working with a family court lawyer for the past 6 months, trying to force him to take a paternity test and pay child support. But Randall lawyered up, too. He's fighting the claim, desperate to keep his wife in the dark about the affair and worried about how child support would affect his own family's finances. Even if Emily wins, the amount she'd get probably won't be enough for her to afford rent and childcare on her current income. As for me and Emily, nothing's changed. Our relationship is still distant, strained, and unresolved. She's never once apologized for the lies she told at my graduation party or acknowledged how much damage she caused. We've had a handful of interactions, brief, polite exchanges when I visited my parents and she happened to be around, but there's no real connection, no effort on her part to make things right. From what I can tell, Emily sees herself as the victim in all this. She seems to genuinely believe everyone overreacted and that she's the one who's been wronged. She lost her marriage, she's raising a baby alone, and she's low on resources. In her mind, that's punishment enough. Meanwhile, my parents are worn out. Supporting both Emily and Grace emotionally, financially, and physically has taken a huge toll on them. They've aged a lot in the past year. They adore Grace and are committed to raising her in a stable home, but behind closed doors, they've admitted to me that they're scared. Scared about their health, their finances, and what the future looks like now that they've basically become full-time parents again in their late 50s. I do what I can to help. I babysit Grace sometimes, pitch in for baby supplies when I can, and try to ease some of the pressure off my mom and dad. But I've held my boundary when it comes to Emily. Grace is innocent in all of this, she deserves love, support, and stability from her whole family. But I won't pretend like Emily didn't cross a line or act like time has erased what she did. Some things you just don't sweep under the rug.